The first time our daughter locked us out of our own bank account, she told us it was for our safety. She said it gently, confidently, the way only someone who believes they are entitled can speak. That was the moment we understood something had gone terribly wrong, even though it would take us years to fully grasp how deep the betrayal went. My name is Thomas Caldwell, and my wife is Margaret Caldwell. We are both in our early 80s now, living in Arizona, where we thought our retirement years would be slow, warm, and predictable. We are telling this story together because what happened to us did not belong to one of us alone. It unfolded quietly, legally, and almost invisibly, carried out not by strangers or criminals, but by the child we raised, protected, and trusted more than anyone else in the world. I spent my life as a mid-level operations manager for a logistics company based in Phoenix. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady. Margaret was a registered nurse for nearly 40 years, mostly in outpatient care. Between us, we built a disciplined, modest life. We paid off our home, avoided debt, saved consistently, and invested conservatively. By the time we retired, we had no illusions of luxury, but we had security. That security was meant to support us first, and eventually pass on to our children. Or at least, that's what we believed. We had 2 children. Our son moved out of state years ago and lived his own life without much involvement. Our daughter, Jennifer, stayed close. She was intelligent, organized, and outspoken from a young age. She went to college, earned a degree in healthcare administration, and later worked in management roles at private clinics. She spoke fluently about systems, efficiency, and compliance. When she offered to help us manage things, as we aged, it sounded sensible, even comforting. At first, her help was genuinely helpful. She scheduled appointments. She organized paperwork. She explained insurance language we found confusing. When Margaret began experiencing arthritis flare-ups and I had minor heart issues, Jennifer's involvement increased naturally. She framed everything as protection. She warned us about fraud, about cognitive decline, about how quickly things could fall apart if we didn't plan ahead. We listened, because fear dressed as concern is very persuasive. The first legal shift came when Jennifer suggested a durable power of attorney. She explained it carefully, using examples from her work. She said it would only activate if something happened to us. She said it was reversible. She said it was standard. We signed. The second shift came when she recommended consolidating our accounts for clarity. Fewer statements. Less confusion. More oversight. We agreed again. What we didn't realize was that oversight had quietly turned into authority. Statements stopped arriving. Passwords were changed. When I asked for access to an investment account I had managed for decades, Jennifer said the platform had updated security protocols. When Margaret tried to dispute a pharmacy charge, she was told she was no longer listed as the primary account holder. Jennifer always had an explanation. Always technical. Always reasonable. Always delivered with a tone that made questioning feel embarrassing. Then came the allowances. Jennifer told us she had noticed irregular spending. She said it kindly, but the implication was clear. She placed a monthly limit on our debit cards and insisted larger purchases be discussed in advance. We were stunned, but also confused. She showed us spreadsheets. Charts. Projections. She spoke as if the future were fragile and only she could stabilize it. We didn't yet understand that she had already decided our role in our own lives. The house was next. Jennifer suggested transferring it into a family LLC for asset protection. She said it would shield us from liability and simplify inheritance. We hesitated. She pressed harder. She brought in an attorney, hers. The meeting was fast, professional, overwhelming. We signed again, still believing we were protecting ourselves. Within a year, Jennifer was paying herself a management fee. That was when Margaret finally said something that cut through all the confusion. She said, quietly, one evening at the kitchen table, "Thomas, I don't think we're being helped anymore. I think we're being managed." The truth arrived slowly after that, but once it did, it was unmistakable. Jennifer had used perfectly legal tools, powers of attorney, LLC structures, consolidated accounts, to strip us of control without ever breaking the law outright. She hadn't stolen from us. She had repositioned herself above us. And the most dangerous part was that she genuinely believed she was right. When we confronted her, she didn't deny anything. She said we were emotional. She said we didn't understand modern financial realities. She said she was preventing future problems. She even said we should be grateful. That was the moment something changed inside us. Not anger. Clarity. What Jennifer didn't know was that years earlier, Margaret had insisted we keep a separate relationship with an estate attorney in Tucson, a man named Harold Klein, whom Jennifer had never met. She had done it, just in case, she said back then. That quiet decision would become the foundation of everything that followed. We called Harold the next morning. He listened. He asked questions Jennifer never had. And then he said something we will never forget: "What your daughter has done is sophisticated, but sophistication does not make it untouchable." That was the beginning of the end of her control, and the beginning of the lesson she never expected to learn. The days after our first meeting with Harold Klein were some of the strangest of our lives. On the surface, nothing changed. Jennifer still called regularly. She still spoke with the same practiced calm, still referred to our finances as the system, still reminded us how complicated things would be without her. But underneath that normalcy, something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since she had stepped into our affairs, we were no longer reacting. We were observing. Harold asked us to bring everything we could find. Old statements, emails, legal documents, operating agreements, insurance notices. It was more difficult than it should have been. Jennifer had centralized access so thoroughly that even locating our own information felt like trespassing. But Margaret had always been careful in quiet ways. She kept copies. She made notes in margins. She saved emails that felt important at the time, even if she couldn't explain why. Those instincts, developed over decades as a nurse, proved invaluable. What emerged was a pattern, not a single crime. Jennifer had structured herself into a position where every meaningful decision required her consent. The power of attorney was active, not dormant. The LLC operating agreement named her as managing member with broad discretion. The management fee was technically permitted under the agreement she had drafted. Individually, each move was defensible. Together, they formed a cage. Harold explained it to us in plain language. "This isn't theft," he said. "It's control through complexity. Courts take that seriously when it involves aging parents." He also warned us of something else: if we confronted Jennifer too soon, she would tighten her grip. We needed to move carefully, deliberately, and quietly. So we did something that went against every parental instinct we had. We pretended nothing was wrong. Jennifer interpreted our calm as compliance. She became more relaxed, more open in her communications. She forwarded documents without as much redaction. She discussed long-term plans with alarming candor. She spoke about downsizing our home without asking, about reallocating funds for future care, about how difficult it was for her to manage our needs alongside her career. Each conversation revealed more than she realized. Meanwhile, Harold began preparing a legal counterweight. He filed notices to revoke and replace the power of attorney, citing undue influence and changed circumstances. He drafted amendments to the LLC agreement that restored voting rights to us as owners. He requested formal accountings, something Jennifer had never voluntarily provided. None of these actions were aggressive. They were procedural. And procedure, we learned, is the language the law respects most. The first crack appeared when Jennifer received notice from one of the banks requesting her to verify her authority. She called us immediately, her voice tight. She said there had been a misunderstanding. We told her calmly that our attorney was reviewing our documents. There was a long pause. Then she said something we had never heard from her before: "Why would you do that without telling me?" The question revealed more than she intended. Not concern for us. Concern for control. From that point forward, her tone shifted. She became sharper, less patient. She reminded us how much she had sacrificed. She hinted at how vulnerable we were without her. When that didn't work, she tried guilt. She said we were hurting her. She said family shouldn't involve lawyers. We listened without reacting. Harold had warned us this phase would come. Resistance often appears as emotional appeal when authority begins to slip. The formal accounting request changed everything. Jennifer delayed, then partially complied, then objected. Each delay raised red flags. Harold filed a petition with the county court requesting oversight due to potential elder financial exploitation. The word exploitation startled us when we saw it in writing. It felt harsh. But Harold was clear: this isn't about accusing her of being evil. It's about restoring your autonomy. Jennifer was served the petition at her office. She arrived at our house that evening unannounced, furious and frightened. She accused us of betrayal. She said we had humiliated her. She said the court would never side with us. Margaret listened quietly, then said something simple and devastating: "You stopped asking us what we wanted a long time ago." Jennifer had no answer for that. The court proceedings moved slowly but steadily. A temporary financial guardian was appointed, independent and neutral. Accounts were frozen for review. Jennifer's authority was suspended pending investigation. For the first time in years, Margaret and I were asked directly what we wanted, what we understood, what we had consented to. We answered calmly, clearly, and without hesitation. The Guardian's report confirmed what Harold had argued: Jennifer had exceeded her fiduciary role, prioritized her own judgment over our expressed wishes, and financially benefited from arrangements that reduced our independence. The court did not accuse her of criminal behavior. It didn't need to. It removed her. The ruling was precise and unemotional. Jennifer was stripped of power of attorney. Removed as managing member of the LLC. Ordered to reimburse fees taken under conflict of interest. Prohibited from exercising financial control over us again. The structures she had built so carefully were dismantled with the same legal tools she had used to create them. Jennifer did not speak to us after that. What surprised us most was not her anger, but our relief. We slept better. We breathed easier. Decisions felt lighter. Control returned not with drama, but with quiet finality. We had not destroyed our daughter's life. We had simply taken ours back. And in doing so, we had taught her a lesson no lecture ever could: love does not grant ownership, and help does not justify dominance. After the court removed Jennifer from any position of authority over our lives, there was a long stretch of silence. Not the peaceful kind at first, but the hollow kind that follows confrontation when everyone involved is recalculating who they are without leverage. Jennifer didn't call. She didn't text. She didn't send messages through relatives. It was as if she had stepped out of the frame entirely, and in a way, that absence was more telling than any argument could have been. Control, once removed, often leaves nothing behind. For Margaret and me, the days immediately after the ruling felt unfamiliar. We were no longer asking permission. We were no longer checking with someone else before making ordinary decisions. Something as simple as buying new furniture or scheduling appointments felt strange, like using a limb that had been restrained for too long. Harold warned us this adjustment period was normal. Autonomy, he said, can feel overwhelming when you haven't exercised it in a while. He was right. But each small choice restored confidence, and confidence restored dignity. We began the slow work of rebuilding our lives on our own terms. Accounts were separated and simplified. Statements came directly to us again. Passwords were changed, access carefully limited. The family LLC was dissolved entirely, its stated purpose now revealed as unnecessary at best and manipulative at worst. The house was returned to our direct ownership, free of Jennifer's management structure. Seeing our names alone on the deed again felt symbolic, as though we had reclaimed not just property, but identity. Jennifer's reaction, when it finally came, arrived indirectly. A mutual acquaintance mentioned she had taken an extended leave from work. Another said she was considering relocating. Someone else quietly noted that her professional reputation had suffered. Nothing dramatic, nothing public. Just enough friction to slow her forward motion. In professional circles, being removed by a court for overreach with elderly parents doesn't come with a scarlet letter, but it does come with hesitation. People begin to ask questions they hadn't asked before. Margaret struggled more emotionally than I did, at least on the surface. She grieved not just the loss of trust, but the loss of the daughter she thought she had. She replayed memories, searching for early signs she might have ignored. I reminded her gently that love always rewrites history to make itself feel safer. Jennifer hadn't changed overnight. She had grown into her entitlement gradually, and we had grown accustomed to stepping aside. Understanding that didn't erase the pain, but it softened the blame. We attended counseling together for a short time, not because we were broken, but because we wanted language for what had happened. The therapist said something that stayed with us. Estrangement caused by boundaries is not abandonment. It's a correction. That reframing mattered. We weren't rejecting our daughter. We were refusing a role that harmed us. There is a difference, even if it's one many people never learn to articulate. As the months passed, Jennifer attempted one final maneuver. She sent a carefully worded email suggesting mediation. Not reconciliation, mediation. She framed it as a way to clear misunderstandings and restore mutual respect. Harold reviewed the message and shook his head. She's still negotiating, he said. Not relating. We declined politely. There was nothing left to clarify. The court had already translated our reality into legal truth. Life became quieter after that. Not emptier, quieter. We reconnected with neighbors we had unintentionally drifted away from. We hosted small dinners. We traveled locally, nothing ambitious, just enough to remind ourselves that movement was still possible without oversight. Margaret laughed more easily again. I noticed it first one evening when she laughed at something trivial on television, the sound light and unguarded. That was when I knew we were healing. Jennifer eventually resurfaced in a limited way. A holiday card. No return address. A generic message wishing us well. We appreciated the restraint. It suggested she had learned at least one important lesson: proximity was no longer her right. We did not respond. Not out of bitterness, but because relationships that survive this kind of fracture must be rebuilt slowly, and only if both sides understand the new terms. Financially, we were stable again. Emotionally, we were changed. We no longer assumed that closeness guaranteed care or that good intentions prevented harm. We became advocates, quietly and deliberately, for others our age. Margaret spoke to nursing colleagues about warning signs she had once dismissed. I spoke at a local community center about legal preparedness. We didn't dramatize our experience. We presented it as what it was, a cautionary example of how easily love can be used to justify control. Jennifer's lesson unfolded slowly, as most lasting lessons do. She did not lose everything. She was not ruined. She simply lost access. And in losing access, she lost the illusion that authority comes from proximity alone. Whether she ever fully understood what she had done, we may never know. But understanding was no longer required for our peace. By the time we reached our mid-80s, the conflict felt like something that had happened in another life. It had shaped us, yes, but it no longer defined us. We had reclaimed not just our finances, but our voices. We had learned that boundaries are not acts of hostility, but acts of survival. The hardest truth we came to accept was also the most freeing. Some children must lose control before they learn respect, and some parents must endure distance to preserve dignity. Our story did not end with reconciliation, but it did end with balance. And for us, that was enough. As the years moved forward, the sharp edges of what Jennifer had done continued to dull, but the shape of it never disappeared entirely. It became part of the landscape of our lives, like a scar you stop touching but never forget is there. Margaret and I aged the way most people do, slowly, unevenly, with good months and difficult ones. But what never returned was the sense of being watched, evaluated, or managed. That absence was the greatest gift the legal process had given us, and we protected it fiercely. We downsized again, not out of fear or pressure, but choice. A smaller home closer to medical care, easier to maintain, quieter. Every decision was ours, discussed between us at the kitchen table without anyone else steering the conversation. Margaret took particular comfort in that. After years of having her judgments subtly dismissed, she delighted in small acts of autonomy. Choosing paint colors, rearranging furniture, deciding what could wait and what couldn't. Control, we learned, doesn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful. Sometimes it's just the right to decide something small without explanation. Jennifer remained distant. There were no confrontations, no emotional scenes, no attempts to force reconciliation. Instead, there was a careful distance that felt intentional on her part. We heard through family that she had moved to another state, taken a less visible role at work, simplified her life. Some relatives speculated that she was embarrassed. Others thought she was angry. We stopped speculating. Whatever lessons she was learning were hers to carry, not ours to supervise. Margaret's health declined first. Nothing sudden, nothing cruel. Just the accumulation of years. When she passed, it was peaceful and quiet, the way she had always said she hoped it would be. In the days that followed, grief came in waves, but not regret. We had protected each other when it mattered most. We had finished our life together standing upright, not diminished. That knowledge steadied me when everything else felt unsteady. Jennifer attended the service but kept her distance. She offered condolences politely, without drama or expectation. I thanked her. We did not speak again after that. There was no anger left between us, but there was no intimacy either. The relationship had found its final shape years earlier, and neither of us tried to force it into something else. Sometimes restraint is the last form of respect people are capable of. Living alone after Margaret was difficult, but not frightening. The systems we had put in place held. Bills arrived. Care was scheduled. Decisions were made calmly. I was not dependent on anyone who did not respect my agency. That mattered deeply to me in those final years. Dependence is not weakness when it is chosen and protected. It is only dangerous when it is imposed. Jennifer sent one final letter during this time. It was brief, careful, and free of accusation. She acknowledged that she had overstepped. She did not ask for forgiveness, only said she hoped I was comfortable and well cared for. I believed her sincerity, even if it came late. I did not respond. Not because I wanted the last word, but because closure does not always require dialogue. Sometimes it requires stillness. As my own health faded, I found myself thinking less about betrayal and more about boundaries. About how many older people are taught, implicitly, that love means surrender. That resisting help is selfish. That questioning family intentions is ungrateful. Those beliefs are dangerous. They silence intuition. They reward overreach. If our story does anything after we are gone, I hope it challenges that idea. Love and clarity are not opposites. They are partners. I spent my remaining time doing ordinary things slowly. Reading. Walking when I could. Speaking to small groups about planning, consent, and dignity. Not dramatically. Just honestly. People listened. They always do when someone speaks without bitterness. Jennifer's life, from what I understood, stabilized. She never regained the level of authority or ambition she once pursued so aggressively, but she functioned. She adapted. That, too, is a form of consequence, not destruction, but limitation. Control, once abused, is rarely returned in full. By the time I sensed my own ending approaching, there was nothing left unresolved that mattered. The estate plan was clear. The records complete. The letter Margaret and I had written years earlier remained intact, ready to be delivered not as an indictment, but as a record of truth. Not to punish, but to prevent revision. This part of the story is quieter than the others, but it is where meaning settles. After the conflict. After the legal battles. After the distance hardens into permanence. This is where dignity proves whether it can last on its own. And it did. By the time my body began to fail in ways that could no longer be ignored, I had already made peace with how our story would end. Not in reconciliation, not in dramatic forgiveness, and not in bitterness either. It would end the way we had lived the final stretch of our lives, quietly, deliberately, with our dignity intact. That mattered more to me than repairing something that had been broken by choice rather than misunderstanding. In my final months, I thought often about the difference between love and obligation. When you are young, you confuse the two easily. You believe love requires sacrifice without limit, patience without condition, and trust without verification. Age teaches you otherwise. Love that demands your erasure is not love. It is entitlement wearing a familiar face. Margaret had understood that before I did, and it was her quiet insistence on preparedness that saved us both. If there is one truth I would pass on, it is this: clarity is the last and greatest kindness parents can give themselves. The letter Margaret and I wrote all those years ago remained unchanged. It was delivered after my passing exactly as we intended. It explained, calmly and without accusation, what had happened, why we acted, and what we hoped Jennifer would someday understand. We did not assign blame. We documented reality. That distinction was important to us. Stories survive longer than emotions, and we wanted the truth to survive us. Jennifer did not contest the estate. She did not challenge the documents. She did not reach out through intermediaries. From everything I was told, she accepted the outcome quietly. Perhaps age had taught her something too. Perhaps not. Either way, the lesson no longer depended on her understanding it. Consequences do not require agreement to be effective. What remains of us now exists in systems that worked as designed, in charities that benefited while we were still alive, in conversations sparked by a story that refused to stay silent. Margaret and I were not perfect parents. We made mistakes. We loved deeply and trusted too easily. But we corrected course when it mattered, and that correction preserved our final years from fear, confusion, and humiliation. That is not a small victory. For aging people, it is everything. If you are listening to this story and wondering whether it is too late for you, let me be clear, it is not. As long as you are capable of asking questions, of insisting on understanding, of refusing to sign what you do not fully grasp, you still have agency. You are not obligated to surrender your life to prove your love. You are allowed to protect yourself, even from your own children. Our story ends without applause, without reconciliation, without spectacle. It ends with two parents who refused to disappear quietly, who chose structure over sentiment when sentiment became dangerous, and who lived their final years on their own terms. That is not revenge. That is justice shaped by wisdom. And that, in the end, was the lesson that lasted.